Guys, welcome back to our Marvel theme show as we are getting ready for the new Infinity War movie. We'll be reviewing that here shortly, but we're going to be doing something now. It's a documentary about the guy who helped make Marvel what it is, and that's Stan Lee. The documentary is called With what is it called?
With great power.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Stan Lee story.
I'm already messing this up. Jamie, Stan Lee is a huge influence, not only in the Marvel scene, but in the whole comic book scene.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's correct.
Awesome.
All right, see you.
All right.
No.
This documentary delves into his life, how he got started with Marvel Comics, and what he kind of did to help, branch off and make it the powerhouse that it is today.
Yeah.
What does Stan Lee mean to you?
To me,
Yeah.
I remember reading Stan Lee scripted stories from when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Because I started reading comics in the 70s, and he was still very much a part of the company. I don't know if he had become editor-in-chief or whatever.
Right.
I think Roy Thomas might have been editor-in-chief there for several years, like when I first started reading. But, like you said, Stan helped put Marvel on the map, along with, a handful of artists.
Sure.
There's a lot of people that are fans of, like, a lot of these characters, especially Captain America, Spider-Man, etc., X-Men, and so on. They know Stan had some involvement, but they don't realize that some of the characters that showed up in Marvel were around before Marvel Comics actually was around.
Really?
Yeah. So, like, Captain America goes way back. He goes back to the war, basically, and that's, a lot of people know that origin story of how, he fought in the war, and then he was, suspended in animation, frozen in ice for so many years, and then they thawed him out, that kind of thing. And like, when he first appeared, I guess it was Timely Comics, which is where Stan kind of got his start,
Mm-hmm.
and it explains in the documentary how Stan went from Timely to Marvel and turned it all into something a little bit different and a little more pizzazz or whatever,
Sure.
But to me, Stan has always been like the architect, I guess you'd say.
Would you consider him like the face of Marvel as well?
Oh, definitely. So, because even when he, after so many years, when he kind of quit writing as much for them, and he became more of a figurehead for the company. I think they actually even made him publisher for a while, and and in that capacity, he probably just really talked on the phone a lot and met a lot of creators to help, steer them into Marvel and trying to help them if they wanted to write Spider-Man or something like that. And Stan's been associated with Marvel even after he basically quit, or I don't know that they necessarily let him go. I think he just kind of decided, well, I'm going to go do some other stuff.
Yeah, whatever it was, the documentary didn't really explain that very well.
Yeah, it didn't really delve into it. And it's a little bit of I guess it is a little bit of a gray area, even for people that like follow him. Because you always hear so many different sides to these things, and there's different stories. Like, there's different books written that are about Marvel Comics, specifically, and Stan Lee specifically, and then some of the artists, biographies and whatnot. And if you read a bunch of them, you start to put the pieces together, And then, you kind of have to rely on the word of the people that were involved too.
Sure.
Because to some people, Stan Lee is a bit of a, I don't have the right word to explain this. It's not that he's a bad guy, but like to some people, they think that he took more credit than he should have.
I was getting ready to ask you that because Jack Kirby was a huge influence on Marvel and helped co-create a lot of these characters. Do you think Jack Kirby gets a bad rap because he doesn't have the great personality that Stan Lee does?
Well, maybe to a degree, because Jack worked so hard on all of that. There's stories about him where he would tack up 6 pieces of paper and be working on 6 pages basically all at the same time in his studio.
Yeah.
And he just, I get the feeling he was just a workhorse, for lack of a better term, that he could really just crank stuff out. Because if you go back and look at the old Marvel stuff in the 60s when they started, he drew half of it seems like.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, Jack Kirby's on Tales to Astonish? What? Fantastic Four? And he's in this book,
Right.
So, and that was just how those guys worked, because, a lot of the guys that were with Marvel worked for other studios before that. And that was the way that things were put together when back in the early days of comics. Was you had a production studio where everything took place. The writing, the drawing, the inking, the coloring, the lettering, it's like all in-house. And I think Marvel was the first one to actually call that a bullpen. And but they followed the same model. If you worked for Marvel, you came down to their office, and you had a drawing board, or you had a desk or somewhere to write, or whatever your job was that pertained to it, and they traded pages around. When somebody was through penciling, they hand it to the next guy, and he inked it, and then it got lettered, or vice versa, and then it handed off to a colorist, and they make stats, and then they color those. They don't color the actual artwork. And so there's a lot to it.
Big process.
Yeah,
huge process.
Yeah, and a lot of people aren't aware of like how many people were involved, because not everybody got credited back in the day,
right?
Because it was a studio type thing. It was like, it might be Millie the Model by such and such studio, and then you might find out who the writer or the main artist was occasionally, but a lot of times they just didn't have credits.
So if you're a fan of comics, comic book movies, Stan Lee, is this a worthwhile documentary? Should people watch this?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a little cheesy in parts, and it is lacking some information in other parts.
Yeah, that was my big issue. Was like they would tell you something, and you're like, okay, and they would just kind of stop. They wouldn't go into more detail about it.
They didn't elaborate and then or follow up and go, and then 5 years later this happened.
Right.
And you're thinking, well, how did he get to this point?
Sure.
So.
The movie is called Stan Lee with Great Power. It's a documentary. If you are into Marvel, kind of want to see how it all kind of got started, at least with Stan, give it a check out, all right? Jamie, you're into comic books, but a lot of people don't know that you delve into comic books personally, as far as you have your own company that you work with, right?
Yes.
You work with a bunch of guys, right?
Yeah. We're called Helot Comics, and we're not really doing much right now.
But you have an archive of stuff, right?
Yeah, we've got, I'd have to actually go back and count to see how much stuff we have all together. We started around 2009, somewhere in there.
Sure.
And it's all been local guys. That's what's been kind of cool about it. It's all people that were from Southeast Missouri mostly, and it was funny that like one of our first writers was a guy that I met when I lived in Cape briefly, and he worked for a comic shop that I went to. And then he's like, hey, I do some writing. And so we became buddies, and then he moved to Springfield. And then he met an artist out there and then started working with him. And then I knew my buddy Andy Borders, who does his own stuff now. Right. He's got his little like one-man studio. And, and then like we got Rob Duckett and Brad Wilson, the tattoo artist.
Yeah.
And Brad does some amazing stuff. But it's all been local guys. And the funny thing about working with Rob was he was living in Alaska when we first started working with him, but he's from here. He's from Poplar, Bluff.
Right.
So it all kind of worked out that it was all SEMO guys,
That's cool. And if people want to maybe see some of your stuff, or at least your contact information, you guys are on Facebook, right?
Yeah, we're on Facebook. We had a website for about a year, and it kind of fell by the wayside. I'm trying to get that back up and running.
Yeah, those cost money.
Yeah.
Those websites.
So, and the problem was we were trying to sell digital versions of the comics, and we never could find an easy way to monetize it where it made sense, because that costs money too,
Sure.
for some other website to keep track of how much money goes in there and all that. So I'm trying to work all that out, and I may just make all the early stuff free, because we did like a anthology style book for about 2 years, and it was because everybody's got day jobs and families and other things going on. I played in bands, and so you only had so much time to do so much stuff. So we would just put the books out like, here's 5 pages of this story and 6 pages of this story. And then eventually we got enough stuff, we started doing single issues where everything was all self-contained.
Yeah.
So I may make those anthologies available for free if I can get the site back up and going, just to give people something to look at and read and decide whether they want to go further. And then have the individual issue stuff, that would be what you buy. So
do you guys still make appearances at the cons?
Every once in a while. We did SEMOCon, the first SEMOCon here in town, back in September.
Sure.
We'll be back there this year at the second annual SEMOCon. We made our debut at Cape Comic Con, and it's always been a cool show, but logistically we just couldn't work it out this year because we always had fun and looked forward to that show and hanging out because we didn't always get to see each other. Like I said, some guys lived in Springfield and Alaska, but and then we'd come and do a show like that, and everybody get to hang out for 3 days. But this year, we got 2 guys in Chicago, and they couldn't make it down, and then I was going to be out of town, I think, for a gig, and it just didn't work. We're skipping that one, but we'll be at some other shows. I found out about a really neat little show in Arkansas, which I'll have to go back through my notes to find it again. There are tons and tons of Comic Cons, man. Even if they're little 1-day shows or 3-day shows or whatever, and a lot of them are within driving distance of here.
Cool.
So it's like been kind of researching that, and there's a really cool con in Memphis that I'd like to go to, but we're trying to work that out too. So
cool. All right, he's Jamie. If you're into comic books, man, we've got the biggest, the best of them all. It's the best, man.
Best.
It's Infinity War, Avengers. We'll dive into that next right here on the Screen Team.